안녕하십니까. And I want to say right at the beginning that I feel it is a great honour to come to talk to you today. I am a professor at the University of Oxford, Oxford Dehaku, which has been ranked just recently as the top university in the world, even ahead of Harvard, Yale, Princeton and all the other big universities. Moreover, I've been a professor at Oxford University for very many years, with honorary degrees from here, members of academies there, and so on. And you might think, therefore, that I come from a wealthy and privileged background, particularly with a family name like Noble. But if you think that, you'd be entirely wrong. I was born into a poor working-class family, a tailoring family in London just before the Second World War. I was the first person in my family ever to go to a university. And I remember the arrival at my university, University College London, to begin my studies in medicine. All the other students seemed already to know what to expect. Their parents had bought them expensive medical textbooks. They came from schools that had prepared them for the sudden change in the speed of learning when you go from school to university. It all seemed very confusing, as though they had at least a year's start over preparation for university compared to me. Anyway, I couldn't afford the expensive textbooks. That was my first experience of meeting such a challenge in life. And I can tell you that in such a situation it's easy to feel overwhelmed and not to know what to do. But then I thought how much my parents had sacrificed to make it possible for me to do what was not possible for them. So there was only one sensible option. It was to realize this is my life. And there's no rehearsal for it. You just have to keep going forward and make of it what you can. You have to keep going. So I volunteered to organize and become the secretary of one of the university societies, because I found that I could hide my uncertainty in working with other people and learn from them. And incidentally, I believe as a professor that students everywhere often learn much more from each other than they do from their professors. So after a year of hard study, I began to find myself near the top of the class. But then problems arrived. It started in a simple way because the society held an annual dinner, and I was expected to wear a dinner suit. I'd never worn one. I didn't have one. My family didn't have one. My father, remember, he was a tailor. He said, "No problem. We've got cloth left over from suits I've made for other people. We will make a pattern and we will make one for you." So he did. He measured me up and prepared the pattern from which he would make a dinner suit. But he never had the chance to make it. He was ill. And he passed away before he could do it. It was my mother that made this suit. It's the same suit 60 years later. The death of my father left me still a student, but with 3 younger brothers to care for. I thought the dinner suit was a big problem, but now I had an even bigger problem. I had no idea how I could continue to study. And that made me reflect again on the nature of life. There's only one way in which you can be prepared for emotional and financial challenges like the death of a parent, because life, as I said, is not a rehearsal. There's no alternative but to keep going. So I did indeed keep going. I used to cycle all the way across London every day to make the supper for us all after the lectures were finished. I think I started reading my books and writing essays at about 10 o'clock at night. And perhaps I worked harder than the other students because I ended up by graduating with the top mark and receiving a fully funded scholarship to do research for my doctorate. Now, the point of this story is there's nothing particularly unusual about me. I must have seemed to be one of the most ordinary students in my class of 100 medical students at UCL. Everyone faces emotional and financial challenges like the ones I faced. And there's no time to prepare for the sudden challenges that surprise us, because life is not a rehearsal. Shakespeare wrote in his marvelous play, As You Like It, all the world's a stage, and all the men and women are merely players. But the difference from acting on a stage is that there's no dress rehearsal. The rehearsal has to be in your mind. You have to be prepared for anything that can happen and keep going. I thought that when I received a scholarship to study for a PhD, that I would just work away in a laboratory for 3 or 4 years, and that somehow, perhaps magically, a thesis would emerge. How wrong I was. Because during my first year, I had a great piece of luck. With my supervisor, we made 2 important scientific discoveries. And I knew from my undergraduate studies that 8 years previously, the Nobel Prize-winning scientists Alan Hodgkin and Andrew Huxley had calculated the activity of nerve cells. They went on to produce a discovery that was the well-known mathematical model of nerve excitation. And as an undergraduate, I was highly impressed by what they had done. I knew that whenever I had the opportunity, I wanted to do something similar for the heart. And the experimental results I'd found gave me exactly the opportunity. I could go on to do in the heart what they had done for nerve. Now, I should explain that in those days, in 1960, computers were nothing like what we use today. They were vast machines filling a hall like this, made of tens of thousands of valves, like light bulbs. There was only one such machine in the whole of London. People queued up for the privilege to use it. And so I joined the queue. And when I was interviewed and asked what I wanted to do, I was told very directly, you don't know enough mathematics. It was such a shame. And I went away from their office very, very disappointed. So then I had an idea, and it came from self-examination. Okay, I said, they were right. I didn't know enough mathematics, but was I going to let that stop me? All I had to do was to convince one of the maths lecturers at the university to let me attend his lectures, and he agreed. One condition, that I should be just like all the other students and take the exams that he would set. And his first lectures were totally incomprehensible to me. And once again, I was faced with a difficult decision. Should I give up my dream, or should I keep going? By now, you will know what I did. I just kept going somehow. Somehow I managed to understand his lectures eventually. And a few months later, I went back to the computer office and asked again to have time on the machine. And this time, they agreed. They was giving me time from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock every day. Actually, I should have said every night, because 2 to 4 was AM, not PM. Now, I could have given up at that stage. I was spending the whole day doing experiments on the heart. How could I possibly spend the whole night on the computer? But that's what the dream required. I still don't know how I did it. But somehow I kept going, and at the age of 23, the result was I got 2 publications, even before my thesis, in the top journal in science in the world, Nature. So, in conclusion, I can tell you, my life has certainly not been a rehearsal, nor is yours. For most of the big challenges we all encounter, there can be no rehearsal, except in the mind. And I learnt quite early in my life that there's no alternative to the motto, keep going. 감사합니다.